Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/audio.
Thank you for being a valued supporter of the 10X Podcast Group. Your dedication means the world to us. Today, we bring you a gripping tale titled, The Revenge Scheme. Your continued support and subscription fuel our passion for storytelling, and we deeply appreciate every moment you spend with us. So, without further ado, let's dive into today's compelling narrative. Chapter 1. Shadows of Betrayal. Evelyn Sinclair stood at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of champagne poised delicately in her hand. The glittering crowd swirled around her, their laughter and chatter weaving a tapestry of wealth and influence. The chandeliers above cast a golden glow, reflecting off the polished marble floors and shimmering gowns. Evelyn, however, was not here for the revelry. Her presence was calculated, as precise as the tailored black dress she wore. Her ex-husband, Victor Grayson, was in the center of the room, basking in the adulation of his peers. His booming laugh carried across the space, drawing attention to the commanding presence he so effortlessly exuded. To the world, Victor was a self-made titan of industry, a man who built an empire with grit and vision. To Evelyn, he was a liar, a thief, and the man who had ruined her life. Evelyn sipped her champagne, her lips curving into a faint smile as she watched him. Years of meticulous planning had led her here. Every move she had made since their bitter divorce was a piece in a larger game. Tonight was the beginning of the end for Victor Grayson. Her target was standing just a few feet away. Charlie Monroe, Victor's longtime business partner. Charlie was younger than Victor by a decade, his boyish charm still intact despite the cutthroat world they inhabited. Evelyn knew Charlie well enough to understand his discontent. He was ambitious, loyal to a fault, but simmering with unspoken resentment. Victor had taken credit for too many of Charlie's ideas, dismissed his concerns, and Evelyn suspected, had been skimming profits from their joint ventures. She approached him with the grace of a predator stalking its prey. "Charles," she said, her voice smooth and warm. "It's been ages." Charlie turned, surprise flickering across his face before it softened into a smile. "Evelyn Sinclair. I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, I couldn't resist," she replied, her smile coy. "It's not every day one gets to witness Victor's latest spectacle." Charlie chuckled, his tension easing. "You've always had a way of cutting through the facade." Evelyn tilted her head, her eyes glinting with calculated curiosity. "And you, Charles? How are you holding up, working under Victor's shadow? Or should I say, being overshadowed by Victor?" The question hung in the air, and Evelyn saw the flicker of irritation in his eyes. She had touched a nerve. "Victor and I have a complicated relationship," Charlie admitted, his tone measured. "It's not always easy, but we make it work." "Do you?" Evelyn asked, her voice softening. "Or are you simply enduring, hoping he'll someday acknowledge your contributions?" Charlie stiffened, his smile faltering. Evelyn pressed on, her tone tinged with concern. "Forgive me. I shouldn't pry. I know how Victor operates. He takes and takes, leaving little for those who stand beside him." Charlie studied her, a hint of wariness creeping into his expression. "Why are you telling me this?" Evelyn laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because I've been where you are. Loyal, trusting, and ultimately betrayed. I'm just offering a bit of perspective, Charlie. Consider it a friendly warning." Before he could respond, a burst of laughter from Victor's corner drew their attention. Evelyn's gaze hardened, her smile fading. "He's a master at the game, Charlie. But every master has their weaknesses." Charlie looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "And what's his weakness?" Evelyn's smile returned, this time sharper, more dangerous. Me. The conversation shifted as guests began to gather for Victor's toast. Evelyn excused herself, leaving Charlie to mull over her words. She didn't need to rush him. The seeds had been planted. Doubt was a slow, insidious poison, and Evelyn was a master at administering it. As the night wore on, Evelyn remained on the periphery, watching, listening, and calculating. She had waited years for this moment, and she would not falter now. Victor's downfall would be her greatest triumph, and Charlie Monroe was the perfect pawn in her game. By the time the event ended, Evelyn was already formulating her next move. The stage was set, the players in place. All that remained was to pull the strings. And Evelyn Sinclair was a master puppeteer. Chapter 2. The Seduction. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm, amber glow over the exclusive waterfront resort. Evelyn Sinclair lounged by the infinity pool, her sheer white cover-up draped effortlessly over a deep emerald swimsuit. She exuded the kind of understated elegance that drew eyes without appearing to seek them. A nearby waiter refilled her glass of rose, and she smiled at him, a fleeting, practiced gesture. This was where she thrived, the intersection of opulence and opportunity. She had ensured that Charles Monroe would be here. A few words whispered into the right ears, a well-placed suggestion of networking potential, and he had arrived just as she anticipated. She spotted him as he emerged onto the pool deck, a tailored linen shirt unbuttoned just enough to suggest casual charm. Charlie scanned the area, his gaze lingering on Evelyn. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before slipping her sunglasses down, letting her eyes meet his. "Charlie," she called, her voice lilting over the hum of the resort's soft jazz music. "What a pleasant surprise." He hesitated, then approached, his easy smile masking what she could tell was surprise. "Evelyn, didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," she replied, motioning to the empty lounge chair beside her. "Join me. Or are you too busy chasing deals, even in paradise?" Charlie chuckled and took the seat. "I'll admit I had some business on the island. But a little relaxation doesn't hurt." Evelyn tilted her head, studying him with a mix of amusement and intrigue. "And here I thought you might be running from something. Or someone." He arched a brow. "Running? That's not my style." "Good," she said, her smile widening. "I despise cowards." Their conversation began to flow, buoyed by the languid atmosphere of the resort. Evelyn let Charlie talk about himself, his ambitions, his frustrations, and the subtle but unmistakable grievances he harbored against Victor Grayson. She listened intently, nodding in the right places, mirroring his emotions with practiced ease. "I have to say," Charlie said, his voice dropping slightly, "you were right about Victor. He's not easy to work with." Evelyn set her glass down, leaning forward slightly. "Not easy or not trustworthy?" Charlie hesitated, his gaze darting to the horizon. "Let's just say, he's always looking out for number one." "And where does that leave you?" she asked softly. "Always in the shadows, cleaning up his messes." Charlie sighed, the tension in his shoulders visible. "It's more complicated than that. Victor can be brilliant. But sometimes, I wonder if he'd throw me under the bus if it served his purpose." Evelyn's eyes softened, her voice almost a whisper. "I know exactly how that feels, Charlie. Victor didn't just betray me in our marriage. He dismantled everything I built alongside him. He's a master of exploitation." Her vulnerability was a calculated risk, but it landed. Charlie's expression shifted, a flicker of empathy breaking through his guarded demeanor. "I had no idea he did that to you," he said, his tone tinged with genuine regret. "That's awful." "It was a lesson," Evelyn replied, her voice steady. "A painful one, but it taught me how to see people for who they truly are. And Victor, he's a predator, Charlie. He takes until there's nothing left." The words hung between them, the weight of shared understanding pulling Charlie closer to her orbit. Evelyn reached for her glass, letting a brief silence linger before changing the tone of their conversation. But enough about him, she said, her smile returning. Tell me about you. Surely you're not content to be someone else's second-in-command forever. Charlie laughed, the tension easing. I'm ambitious, sure. But I'm also realistic. Victor's built an empire. It's not exactly easy to go up against that. Empires crumble all the time, Evelyn said casually, though her words carried an edge. All it takes is the right pressure in the right place. He glanced at her, curiosity sparking in his eyes. And you would know that how? She leaned back, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. Let's just say I've learned to see the cracks in the foundation. For the rest of the afternoon they spoke of lighter things. Travel, shared acquaintances and aspirations. Evelyn allowed the tension to ebb, careful not to overwhelm him. She was building trust, and trust was a slow, deliberate process. As the sun dipped further, casting long shadows over the resort, Charlie glanced at his watch and stood. I should probably head back. Early meeting tomorrow. Evelyn rose as well, her movements fluid and graceful. Course. But Charlie, one last thing. He turned, curiosity in his expression. Be careful who you trust, she said, her voice soft but firm. Especially when they've already shown you who they are. Charlie nodded, a flicker of understanding crossing his face before he walked away. Evelyn watched him go, a sense of satisfaction settling over her. The pieces were moving, and Charlie Monroe was stepping neatly into position. Chapter 3, Seeds of Doubt. Charles Monroe paced his sleek office, the soft hum of the city below barely registering in his mind. Evelyn Sinclair's words lingered, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts like a persistent echo. Be careful who you trust, especially when they've already shown you who they are. He tried to shake it off, but her warning resonated with the doubts he'd buried for years. Victor Grayson, his business partner, had always been the charismatic face of their company, but behind closed doors, the dynamic was far less balanced. Charlie had contributed more than his fair share of ideas, strategies, and grueling hours, yet Victor consistently reaped the lion's share of the credit. Charlie sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as his eyes drifted to the framed awards lining the walls. Nearly all of them bore Victor's name alone. A sharp knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. It was Lila, his assistant, holding a thin folder. These came in this morning, she said, placing the file on his desk. It's the quarterly expense report from Victor's office. Thanks, Lila, Charlie muttered, distracted. As she left, he flipped open the folder. The usual figures greeted him, a parade of numbers that blurred into monotony, until his eyes snagged on something unusual. A significant amount allocated under consultancy fees to a company he didn't recognize, Ashbridge Solutions. His brow furrowed. He didn't recall any major consultancy work this quarter, let alone with a firm of that name. Picking up his phone, he dialed Victor's number. Charlie, Victor's smooth voice answered after the second ring. What's up? I was reviewing the expense report, Charlie said, keeping his tone neutral. Ashbridge Solutions. What's that about? I don't remember us bringing in consultants recently. There was a slight pause, almost imperceptible. Oh, that, Victor replied, his tone breezy. Nothing major. Just some external auditors I hired to look into streamlining our operations. Didn't think it was worth mentioning. Streamlining? Charlie pressed. Why wasn't I looped in? Victor chuckled, though it lacked genuine warmth. You've been swamped with other projects, Charlie. Figured I'd save you the hassle. Don't sweat it. It's all under control. Under control. The phrase set Charlie's teeth on edge. It wasn't the first time Victor had made unilateral decisions without consulting him. He ended the call, but the discomfort lingered, mingling with Evelyn's insinuations. He takes until there's nothing left. That evening, Charlie found himself back at the resort, nursing a bourbon in the dimly lit lounge. He hadn't planned on running into Evelyn, but there she was, effortlessly poised at the bar, a vision in navy silk. She caught his eye and smiled, her expression both warm and knowing. "Charlie," she greeted, sliding onto the bar stool beside him. "You look like a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders." He gave a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Just work. You know how it is." "Do I?" she asked, arching a perfectly sculpted brow. "Or is it more complicated than that?" Her perceptiveness unnerved him, but he found himself opening up regardless. "Victor's been making decisions without me lately. Big ones. It's not the first time, but it's starting to feel deliberate." Evelyn leaned closer, her tone laced with empathy. "That's how it starts. Little omissions here and there, justified as efficiency. Before you know it, you're a bystander in your own career." Charlie exhaled, the tension in his chest tightening. "It's just frustrating. I've put in just as much work as he has. More even, but somehow it's always his name on the marquee." Evelyn tilted her head, studying him. "Charlie, have you ever considered that Victor doesn't see you as an equal? That he never has?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He stared into his glass, Evelyn's words dredging up memories he'd long ignored. Meetings where Victor dismissed his ideas, award ceremonies where Victor barely acknowledged his contributions, and moments of quiet realization that his loyalty might be misplaced. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice low. "Maybe I'm just overthinking it." "Maybe," Evelyn said, her tone gentle but firm. "Or maybe you're finally seeing the truth." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the bar to him. "I wasn't going to show you this, but I think you deserve to know." Charlie hesitated before picking it up. Unfolding it, he found a printed email thread. At the top was Victor's name, along with the Ashbridge Solutions consultancy. The correspondence detailed a plan to restructure the company, with repeated mentions of a contingency phase that would result in Charlie's gradual removal from key projects. His blood ran cold. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. Evelyn's expression was carefully measured. "Let's just say I still have a few contacts in Victor's world. People who know what he's capable of and don't want to see you blindsided." Charlie stared at the email, anger bubbling beneath his surface. He felt like a pawn, a disposable piece in Victor's carefully orchestrated game. "This can't be real. Can't it?" Evelyn countered, her voice soft. "Think about it, Charlie. Hasn't he already started pushing you to the margins? Taking credit for your work? Hiring consultants behind your back?" The pieces clicked into place with chilling clarity. Evelyn reached out, her hand brushing his arm. "You deserve better, Charlie. You deserve to be in control of your own destiny." He met her gaze, his mind racing. She was right. He'd spent years playing second fiddle to a man who saw him as nothing more than a tool. But now, with Evelyn's insight and this damning email, he saw a path forward. "What do you think I should do?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Evelyn's smile returned, slow and deliberate. "That depends. Are you ready to take back what's rightfully yours?" For the first time in years, Charlie felt the stirrings of rebellion, a flicker of resolve igniting within him. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I am." Evelyn raised her glass, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Then let's get to work." Chapter 4, The Alliance. Charles Monroe sat in the dimly lit corner of a private lounge in the heart of the city. The room exuded exclusivity, with its plush leather armchairs and low amber lighting that reflected off polished wood surfaces. The air smelled faintly of cigars and expensive whiskey, adding to the charged atmosphere of the meeting. Across from him, Evelyn Sinclair sipped her martini with deliberate grace, her eyes never leaving his. "You're certain about this?" Charlie asked, his voice low but firm. Evelyn set her glass down, her smile faint but confident. "Certainty is a luxury, Charlie. What I offer is opportunity. The chance to step out of Victor's shadow and into the spotlight you deserve." Charlie leaned back, his fingers drumming against the armrest. He had spent the last week replaying their conversations, dissecting the damning evidence she had presented. The email thread alone was incriminating, But it was Evelyn's quiet confidence that had convinced him. She knew Victor too well, understood his patterns. And everything she said felt like a puzzle piece sliding into place. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Evelyn's smile widened slightly. "Partnership. You and I working together to dismantle Victor's empire from within." Her words were calm, deliberate, but their weight sent a shiver down Charlie's spine. "And what's in it for you?" She tilted her head, her expression softening. "Closure. Victor took everything from me, Charlie, my reputation, my future. This isn't just about revenge. It's about justice. But I can't do it alone." Charlie studied her, the sharpness in her eyes, the subtle tension in her posture. She was carefully composed, but beneath the surface, he could sense the raw determination that drove her. He recognized it because he felt it too. Victor had taken too much for too long. "And what's the plan?" he asked finally. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Starts with disruption. Strategic leaks, carefully placed rumors, and subtle sabotage. Victor's business is a house of cards, Charlie. All it needs is a little push." The next day, Charlie stepped into his office with a renewed sense of purpose. He had spent the night going over Evelyn's proposed strategy. It was bold, intricate, and required precise timing. But if executed correctly, it would destabilize Victor's position without exposing their involvement. Evelyn's first move was simple but effective. Plant doubt among Victor's key investors. Charlie began the process by reaching out to one of their major stakeholders, a notoriously cautious hedge fund manager named Robert Langston. Over lunch, Charlie subtly suggested concerns about Victor's recent decisions, hinting at potential financial instability. "I'm not saying there's anything to worry about," Charlie said, his tone carefully measured. "But there's been a lot of aggressive expansion lately. Sometimes it's worth taking a closer look at the numbers." Langston frowned, his brow furrowing. "Are you implying there's something off in the books?" "Not at all," Charlie replied smoothly. "Just that due diligence never hurts, especially with the current market volatility." The seed was planted. By the time Charlie returned to his office, Langston had already reached out to a forensic accounting firm to review the company's latest filings. Meanwhile, Evelyn played her part with precision. Using her extensive network, she reached out to journalists who had once covered Victor's rise to power. Her angle was subtle, a suggestion of whispers within the industry about potential cracks in Victor's empire. The media loved a fall-from-grace narrative, and Evelyn knew how to dangle the bait without revealing her hand. She also orchestrated a minor PR crisis by anonymously leaking internal memos that highlighted Victor's heavy-handed management style. The memos painted a picture of a leader out of touch with his team, sowing discord among the employees and raising questions about the company's culture. Within days, Victor was fielding calls from concerned investors and damage control meetings with his PR team. The cracks were beginning to show, and Evelyn and Charlie watched from the sidelines, each playing their part with practiced ease. Their partnership deepened with each passing day. Evelyn became Charlie's confidant, her calm demeanor balancing his moments of doubt. She coached him on how to navigate the growing chaos, teaching him the art of manipulation and the value of patience. One evening, as they reviewed their progress in a discreet hotel suite, Charlie voiced a question that had been gnawing at him. "How do you stay so composed? Doesn't this, what we're doing, ever make you question yourself?" Evelyn glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Doubt is a luxury I can't afford. I've spent years being underestimated, dismissed. Now I have clarity. Victor taught me one thing. You can't win if you're afraid to play the game." Charlie nodded slowly, her words resonating. He had spent too long letting fear and loyalty hold him back. Now, with Evelyn by his side, he felt the stirrings of ambition he had buried for years. By the end of the month, the results of their efforts were undeniable. Investor confidence in Victor was wavering, employees were whispering about the leaked memos, and the media buzzed with speculation about the company's stability. Victor, once untouchable, was now scrambling to contain the fallout. Late one night, as Evelyn and Charlie reviewed their next steps, he raised his glass to her. "To partnerships," he said, a trace of a smile on his lips. Evelyn clinked her glass against his, her smile sharp and knowing. "To justice." But as she sipped her wine, a flicker of something darker crossed her eyes. For Evelyn, this wasn't just about justice, it was about control. And as much as Charlie believed they were equals in this alliance, she knew the truth. He was still a pawn in her game. Chapter 5: The First Strike. Victor Grayson's office was a fortress of polished steel and glass, a reflection of the man himself. Sleek, impenetrable, and built to intimidate. Yet as he sat at his sprawling desk, staring at the financial reports spread before him, a faint unease crept into his chest. Numbers didn't lie, and these numbers were troubling. Deals were falling through, stock prices were dipping, and whispers of instability were making their way into meetings where there had once been only admiration and respect. Victor leaned back in his chair, his sharp mind scanning for weak points in the system. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was sabotaging him. But who? His empire was built on loyalty, or so he thought. A man like Victor had no shortage of enemies, yet the precision of these disruptions felt personal, intentional. In another part of the city, Charlie Monroe stood before a team of senior managers, presenting an internal review of recent financial discrepancies. He spoke with calm authority, weaving facts with subtle implications. His words painted a picture of a company teetering on the brink, not from market pressures but from mismanagement. "I'm not pointing fingers," Charlie said, his tone measured, "but we need transparency at every level if we're going to stabilize things. This isn't about blame. It's about protecting what we've built." The managers nodded, murmuring their agreement. The seeds of distrust had taken root, spreading through the upper ranks like wildfire. Employees began questioning decisions they had previously accepted without hesitation. It was exactly what Evelyn had envisioned. Later that evening, Charlie met Evelyn in a dimly lit restaurant. The corner booth gave them privacy, their voices lost in the hum of quiet conversations and clinking glasses. Charlie leaned forward, a hint of excitement in his eyes. "It's working," he said. "The managers are starting to question Victor's decisions. The investors are rattled, and even his closest allies are on edge." Evelyn smiled, sipping her wine with a calmness that belied the storm she had orchestrated. "Good. Doubt is a powerful weapon, Charlie. Once it takes hold, it's almost impossible to eradicate." "But Victor's sharp," Charlie said, his voice dropping. "He's already looking for the source of the disruptions. It's only a matter of time before he starts digging into the wrong places." Evelyn's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. "Then we'll make sure he finds exactly what we want him to find." The next phase of the plan required precision, and Evelyn was a master at wielding subtle chaos. She arranged for a former employee, disgruntled after being forced out by Victor's cutthroat cost-cutting measures, to come forward with allegations of unethical practices. Evelyn provided the man with enough documentation to appear credible without linking herself or Charlie to the leak. The story hit the financial press within days, sending shockwaves through Victor's company. Headlines questioned his integrity, speculating on whether his aggressive tactics were sustainable. The stock dipped further, and investors began demanding answers. Victor responded with a fiery press conference, dismissing the allegations as baseless and accusing competitors of spreading lies. His bravado earned him temporary applause, but behind closed doors, the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, Evelyn worked to tighten her hold on Charlie. Over late-night strategy sessions, she flattered his intelligence, praised his leadership, and fed his growing disillusionment with Victor. "You're the real visionary," she told him one evening as they reviewed the fallout from the latest leak. "Victor's success is built on your hard work. Without you, he's nothing." Charlie soaked in her words, the bitterness he had long suppressed bubbling to the surface. "Then why does he keep treating me like I'm expendable?" "Because he's afraid of you," Evelyn said, her voice low and persuasive. He knows you're the only one capable of taking his empire from him. And he's right. The spark in Charlie's eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was fully committed now. His loyalty to Victor shattered and replaced with ambition. Victor, however, was no fool. He began tightening his inner circle, demanding loyalty from his team and monitoring for signs of betrayal. He held a private meeting with Charlie, his tone sharper than usual. "I've been hearing things," Victor said, his piercing gaze fixed on his partner. "People questioning my leadership, questioning the company. I need to know you're with me, Charlie." Charlie met Victor's gaze with a calm he didn't entirely feel. "Course I am. We've built this company together. Why would I jeopardize that?" Victor studied him for a long moment before nodding, though the suspicion in his eyes lingered. Charlie left the meeting shaken but resolute. Victor was starting to suspect him, but he wasn't ready to act. Not yet. Evelyn, ever the strategist, anticipated Victor's moves. She advised Charlie to stage a diversion, an elaborate but non-critical issue within the company that would direct Victor's attention elsewhere. Charlie followed her advice, orchestrating a minor crisis in the logistics division that occupied Victor for weeks. With Victor distracted, Charlie and Evelyn accelerated their plans. They worked in perfect synchronization, targeting Victor's most loyal allies and turning them against him. Evelyn's manipulation was seamless, her ability to exploit vulnerabilities unparalleled. By the end of the month, Victor's company was in turmoil. The board of directors scheduled an emergency meeting to address the growing instability, and rumors swirled that Victor's position as CEO might be in jeopardy. Evelyn and Charlie met in a private suite overlooking the city, the skyline glittering in the distance. They raised their glasses in a quiet toast, their satisfaction palpable. "To progress," Charlie said, his smile hinting at newfound confidence. "To inevitability," Evelyn replied, her tone smooth and assured. But as she sipped her wine, Evelyn's thoughts turned inward. Charlie believed they were partners, equals in this intricate dance of revenge and ambition. But Evelyn knew the truth. Charlie was a weapon, a tool to be wielded until the final blow. And when that moment came, she wouldn't hesitate to cut him loose. Chapter 6. The Spiral. Victor Grayson stood at the head of the conference table, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room for weakness. The boardroom was unusually silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Around him, his executives and board members avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The whispers of dissent, the rumors of mismanagement, and the plummeting stock prices were no longer just noise. They were weapons aimed directly at him. "This company was built on discipline and vision," Victor said, his voice a low growl. "I will not let speculation and sabotage undo what we've created. If anyone in this room believes otherwise, I suggest you leave now." No one moved, but the unease in the room was palpable. Victor's confidence, once unshakable, was now tinged with desperation. He could feel the cracks widening, and worse, he still hadn't pinpointed their origin. In the shadows of the chaos, Evelyn Sinclair and Charlie Monroe worked tirelessly to tighten their grip on the company. Evelyn's plan was advancing faster than she had anticipated. The board, once fiercely loyal to Victor, was now split, with several key members questioning his leadership. "This is the moment we've been waiting for," Evelyn said, sitting across from Charlie in her lavish penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a glittering view of the city, but Charlie's focus was entirely on her. "You think they'll push for his resignation?" he asked, his tone uncertain. "They won't have a choice," Evelyn replied. "Not with the pressure we're applying. But you need to stay calm, Charlie. Victor's no fool. He'll suspect everyone, including you." Charlie nodded, but his unease was evident. The plan was working, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of something he couldn't control. "Do you think he knows it's me?" Evelyn's smile was sharp, almost predatory. "Let him suspect. That's all it will be, suspicion. Without proof, he can't touch you." But even as she reassured him, Evelyn's mind was already racing ahead. Charlie's growing nerves were a liability, and she couldn't afford any missteps. She needed him focused, not wavering. Victor, meanwhile, was digging deeper. He had quietly hired a private investigator to comb through the company's internal communications, financial records, and even the personal lives of his closest allies. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. The leaks, the rumors, the sudden shifts in loyalty, they all pointed to one conclusion: someone close to him was orchestrating his downfall. Days later, Victor's investigator delivered his preliminary findings. The results were inconclusive but troubling. Charlie's name came up more than once. Conversations with employees who had turned against Victor, meetings that weren't on the calendar, and subtle inconsistencies in his recent actions. Victor stared at the file in silence, his jaw tightening. Charlie. The idea of betrayal cut deeper than he cared to admit. Charlie had been his right hand for years, a trusted partner. But trust was a fragile thing, and the evidence was damning enough to warrant action. Evelyn could sense the shift before Charlie mentioned it. They met in a quiet, upscale restaurant, away from prying eyes. Charlie was visibly agitated, his usually confident demeanor fraying at the edges. "He's on to me," Charlie said, his voice low but urgent. "Victor hasn't said anything outright, but I can feel it. He's watching me." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "What makes you think that?" "There's been too much scrutiny lately. My meetings, my emails. It's like he's combing through everything." She nodded thoughtfully, her mind working through the implications. "This was always a possibility, Charlie. But it doesn't change the plan. If anything, it accelerates it." Charlie frowned. "Accelerates it? How?" "Victor's not going to sit back and let this happen. He'll find a way to shut it down, and me." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "You need to get ahead of him. Turn the suspicion back onto him. Feed the board more evidence of his instability, his erratic behavior. Make them question whether he's fit to lead." The plan was bold, but it carried risks. Charlie hesitated, his confidence wavering. "And what if it backfires?" Evelyn's gaze hardened. "It won't. But only if you commit, Charlie. Half measures won't work here. You have to decide. Are you all in or are you out?" The weight of her words hung between them, and for a moment, Charlie considered walking away. But the thought of Victor winning, of him maintaining his iron grip on everything they had built together, was unbearable. "I'm in," he said finally, his voice steady. Evelyn's smile returned, sly and satisfied. "Good. Then let's finish what we started." The next strike came swiftly. An anonymous email to the board detailed alleged financial improprieties by Victor, accompanied by documents that Evelyn had painstakingly prepared. The timing was impeccable, hitting just days before a major investor meeting. Victor, already on edge, was blindsided by the allegations. Board members began demanding answers, their once private doubts spilling into heated discussions. Victor's attempts to defend himself only fueled the narrative that he was losing control. For Evelyn and Charlie, the fallout was exhilarating but dangerous. The tension between them was growing, fueled by Charlie's increasing paranoia and Evelyn's unwavering composure. She could see the cracks forming in him, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he became a liability. Late one night, as they reviewed their progress in Evelyn's penthouse, Charlie turned to her, his expression troubled. "What happens if this all comes crashing down?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "It won't. But even if it does, Victor will take the fall. You're protected, Charlie." "And you?" he asked, his tone laced with doubt. "Are you protected?" Her smile was faint, enigmatic. "I don't need protection. Have you?" The words were calculated, designed to tether him closer to her. But as she watched the uncertainty flicker across his face, Evelyn knew she had to prepare for the possibility that Charlie's resolve might falter. Victor Grayson was spiraling, but the game was far from over. And Evelyn Sinclair never left anything to chance. Chapter 7. The revelation. Victor Grayson was a man who thrived in chaos, but this was different. His empire, once a paragon of strength, was crumbling around him. The board had summoned an emergency meeting, their patience worn thin by the cascade of scandals and financial instability. Investors were pulling out, employees were jumping ship, and the whispers of his potential resignation were growing louder. Sitting in his office, Victor reviewed the latest blow, a damning report accusing him of manipulating stock prices. The evidence was fabricated, he was certain of it, but the damage was done. The board wanted answers, and they wanted them now. Victor's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from his investigator. Found something. You'll want to see this. Across the city, Evelyn Sinclair sipped her espresso. Her legs crossed elegantly as she watched the rain streak the windows of her penthouse. The storm outside mirrored the one she had unleashed on Victor's world, and the satisfaction coursing through her was intoxicating. Everything was falling into place. Charlie's loyalty was unwavering, at least for now, and Victor was cornered like a wounded animal. But Evelyn knew better than to grow complacent. A man like Victor was most dangerous when he had nothing left to lose. The investigator's findings landed on Victor's desk within the hour. It was a detailed report, thick with charts, timestamps, and communications. And there it was. Charlie Monroe, his trusted partner, the man he had once called a friend, was at the center of it all. The betrayal hit harder than Victor had anticipated. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he read through the documented meetings, the strategically leaked information, the whispers that had been seeded within the company. Charlie had orchestrated this, or at the very least, had been a willing pawn in someone else's game. Victor's sharp mind pieced it together quickly. Charlie didn't have the cunning to pull this off alone. There was another player in the shadows, someone who knew him well enough to anticipate his moves, to exploit his weaknesses. Evelyn. The realization burned through him like acid. He leaned back in his chair, a dangerous calm settling over him. If Evelyn wanted to play games, she had underestimated the master. The boardroom was silent as Victor entered, his presence commanding even in the face of growing dissent. The directors exchanged glances, their unease evident. Victor sat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the room. "I understand there have been concerns about my leadership," Victor began, his voice steady but cold. "I've been accused of financial impropriety, mismanagement, and even sabotage. Let me be clear. These accusations are baseless." One of the directors, Robert Langston, leaned forward. "Victor, with all due respect, the evidence is overwhelming. We've seen the reports, the communications." "Fabricated," Victor interrupted, his tone sharp. "Designed to destabilize this company and destroy my reputation." Langston hesitated, but Victor pressed on. "And I know exactly who's behind it." The room tensed. Victor reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, sliding them across the table. "Charlie Monroe." Gasps rippled through the room. Charlie, who had been seated quietly near the end of the table, paled. "This is ridiculous," he stammered. "You have no proof." "I have plenty of proof," Victor said, his voice cutting like a blade. "Emails, phone records, meeting logs. You've been working against me, feeding lies to the board, and leaking information to the media." Charlie stood, his face flushed with anger. "This is a setup. You're just trying to deflect from your own incompetence." Victor's lips curved into a dangerous smile. "Oh, I'm far from incompetent, Charlie. And I'm not finished." He turned to the board, his gaze unwavering. "Charlie didn't do this alone. He's been working with my ex-wife, Evelyn Sinclair. She's the one pulling the strings, manipulating him, and orchestrating this entire charade." The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as the directors struggled to process the revelation. Charlie's protests were drowned out by the cacophony, but Victor's voice cut through like a whip. "Evelyn has been trying to destroy me for years," Victor continued. "This is her revenge, plain and simple. And she's used Charlie as her pawn." Evelyn received the call from Charlie an hour later. His voice was frantic, his composure completely unraveling. "He knows, Evelyn," Charlie said. "Victor knows everything. He called me out in front of the board. He has evidence. He even named you." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened, but her voice remained calm. "And what did you say?" "I denied it, of course. But the board, they're starting to doubt me. This is falling apart, Evelyn." Evelyn's mind raced. She had anticipated Victor might suspect them, but she hadn't counted on him gathering evidence so quickly. Still, panic was not an option. "Listen to me, Charlie. You need to stay composed. Victor is bluffing. He doesn't have enough to prove anything." "But what if he does?" Charlie pressed. "What if he takes this to the authorities? I'll be finished." Evelyn's tone hardened. "You won't be finished, Charlie, because you won't give him the chance. We move to the final phase now. If Victor wants to escalate, we'll show him exactly what we're capable of." "What does that mean?" Charlie asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "It means we don't just take his company," Evelyn said, her eyes narrowing. "We take everything." Victor sat in his office, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. He knew Evelyn well enough to anticipate her next move. She wouldn't back down, not yet. But he wasn't the same man she had left broken all those years ago. If Evelyn wanted war, she would get it. And Victor intended to win. Chapter 8: Victory's Cost. Evelyn Sinclair's penthouse was quiet, the calm before the storm she knew was coming. The skyline glittered in the darkness, a deceptive serenity masking the chaos she had orchestrated. The confrontation with Victor was inevitable now. He had forced her hand by exposing Charlie, and while she had prepared for this possibility, the stakes had shifted. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about survival. She poured herself a glass of wine, her hands steady despite the tension thrumming through her. She had spent years perfecting her mask, the impenetrable calm that unnerved her opponents and reassured her allies. But tonight, there was no one to see her cracks, except herself. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden. Evelyn's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure as she walked to the door. She opened it to find Charlie, his face pale and drawn. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his movements jittery and erratic. "He's going to destroy me," Charlie blurted, pacing the room. "Victor has everything. The board is turning against me, the media is sniffing around. It's over, Evelyn." Evelyn closed the door, her expression unreadable. "Calm down, Charlie. You're not thinking clearly." "Not thinking clearly," he snapped, whirling to face her. "You don't get it, do you? He's going to bury me, and when he does, he'll come for you." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Victor won't win. Not if you stick to the plan." "There is no plan," Charlie shouted. "Not anymore. He's 2 steps ahead of us now, and you're just sitting here sipping wine, acting like we're still in control." Evelyn set her glass down with deliberate care. "We are still in control, Charlie. But only if you stop panicking and start thinking." Charlie's laughter was bitter. "Thinking? That's rich coming from you. You pulled me into this, fed me your sob story about Victor ruining your life, and now I'm the one who's going to pay for it." Evelyn's voice dropped, cold and sharp. "Don't forget, Charlie, you came to me willingly. You wanted this just as much as I did. Don't try to rewrite history now that the heat is on." Their eyes locked, the air between them crackling with tension. For the first time, Charlie saw something in Evelyn he hadn't noticed before, an emptiness, a ruthlessness that frightened him. She wasn't panicked because she didn't care who got burned, as long as she walked away unscathed. "I'm done," Charlie said, stepping back. "I'm out. Victor wants me to confess, fine. I'll tell him everything." Evelyn moved faster than he expected, her hand gripping his arm like a vice. "You'll do no such thing." Charlie tried to pull away, but her grip tightened. "Let go of me, Evelyn." Her voice was low, deadly. "If you think confessing will save you, you're more naive than I thought." Victor won't stop at taking you down. He'll ruin your life, your reputation, and anyone you've ever cared about. You want to hand him that power." Charlie hesitated, the fire in his eyes dimming as fear took hold. "Then what do we do?" Evelyn released him, her expression softening as she stepped back. "We finish this. Together." Victor Grayson leaned back in his chair, his office dimly lit except for the glow of his computer screen. The investigator's latest report sat in front of him, detailing Evelyn's movements, her connections, and her calculated manipulations. She had underestimated him, but Victor wasn't interested in playing defense anymore. He was going to strike back. He picked up his phone and made the call. "Robert," he said when the board director answered. "We need to move forward with the emergency vote. By tomorrow, Charlie Monroe is out, and I'll have the proof to take legal action against Evelyn Sinclair." Robert hesitated. "Are you sure this is the right move? The media's already circling. This could blow up even more if we're not careful." Victor's voice was ice. "It's the only move. Evelyn wants to play games. Let's see how she handles losing everything." The next morning, the board voted unanimously to remove Charlie from his position. The announcement hit the media within hours, accompanied by Victor's carefully crafted narrative of betrayal and sabotage. Charlie's name was splashed across headlines, his reputation shredded in real time. Evelyn's involvement, while hinted at, remained in the shadows for now. Evelyn watched the news from her penthouse, her face expressionless. Charlie had called her moments after the vote, begging for help, but she had ignored him. He was no longer useful to her. The final act was hers to play, and she intended to make it count. That evening, Evelyn made her move. She contacted one of Victor's most powerful investors, presenting them with carefully doctored documents that painted Victor as the true saboteur. Her pitch was simple but devastating. Victor's leadership was no longer viable. The investor, already uneasy from the recent scandals, agreed to convene a meeting to discuss his removal. Victor arrived at the investor meeting prepared for a fight, but what he found was far worse. Evelyn was there, seated at the head of the table, her confidence unshaken. She laid out her case with precision, dismantling Victor's credibility piece by piece. The investors, swayed by her charm and the weight of the evidence, turned against him. By the end of the meeting, Victor was ousted as CEO. His empire, the culmination of decades of work, was no longer his. Evelyn stood on the balcony of her penthouse that night, the city lights twinkling below. She had won, but the victory was hollow. Charlie had disappeared, his future uncertain. Victor was ruined, but she felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only emptiness. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think it's over?" "It's not." She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. Victor wasn't done, and she knew it. But for now, she allowed herself one moment of quiet. The game was far from over, but she was still standing. And Evelyn Sinclair never lost.